with that, I think we're ready to dive in. And I'm so excited for our presentation today. Um, we'll be joined, or today for our presentation, Raquel Vigil, the Director of Learning here at the Edible Schoolyard Project, will be presenting, and I will be co-presenting today as well. I'm so looking forward to our conversation. And I'm going to quickly walk us through our agenda for today. So we'll give an overview of our session goals at the outset. We're going to then go into a visual exploration activity and then a presentation on strategies for increasing curiosity. We'll have a knowledge bank opportunity, a Padlet, where we can be sharing out our own best practices as far as increasing curiosity is concerned. And we'll go into a mini design challenge in breakout rooms. It'll be fun. And we'll come back for a share out, dialogue, conversation, and then we'll close and have some time for open questions and continued conversations. And so with that, I'm so pleased to pass it to my colleague Raquel.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Russell. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our goals. Really in this workshop, what we hope is that you as educators have an opportunity to think about the instructional strategies that you use to support curiosity in your kitchen and garden classrooms. As always, we want there to be an opportunity for you all as kitchen and garden educators to be able to connect with one another and share best practices. And finally, we really want you as educators to walk away with a set of strategies and tools that you can do to kind of expand or support curiosity in your classrooms. Awesome. Great. Thank you, Russell. So just to review a little bit, I wanted to talk about the kind of three pillars of student engagement. If you participated in our session that we had, Student Engagement 101, we talked a lot about these different pillars and focused kind of some on each. And really, when we talk about student engagement, we're talking about these three areas and the ways that you can strengthen instruction to support students acquiring and understanding the knowledge that you're teaching, their academic success, the ideas around who they are intellectually, right? How much they're showing up to be critical thinkers and interested in the content you're teaching. And finally, how much you're supporting students, both academically and intellectually, but really social emotionally. Again, our month-long series is really exploring different elements of this. And today's workshop is focused on curiosity. Next slide. I'm going to pass it over to Russell, who's going to lead us in the next activity.
Oh, thank you. I realized I was on mute. Thank you so much, Raquel. Yeah, so speaking of curiosity, we're going to dive right in. And here we are inviting everyone to take a closer look with this visual exploration activity to get our creative juices flowing. And so on the screen, of course, we have this image. And I'm inviting everyone to please take some time to look at it. If we were in person, of course, we would have this in front of you so that we could interact with. And so for now, though, I'd love for everyone to take a look at the image and think about some of the first thoughts that come to mind as you look at the image. What do you see here? What is presented for you? Some initial impressions. And having those initial impressions, we're going to drop a few prompting questions into the chat. And those are, what do you see in the image? What feelings, textures, and sensations does the image evoke for you? What do you want to make with this bowl of produce? And what would you do if you placed yourself in the image? So with these questions in mind, I invite you to take the journal and writing device, and we're going to have about 5 minutes of reflection and journaling on our own. Feel free to take yourself off camera if you would like, and we'll come back in 5 minutes and we'll share out how this was for you. So thanks so much. We'll come back in about 5 minutes.
Awesome. So if you want to come on back, does anyone want to come off mute and share some of what the image evoked for them? Some answers to those questions. I also see in the chat there's some great responses. I can read some of those while folks decide if they want to come off mute. I like it says there are some questions about the flowers and some questions about if they're edible or not, if they're just used for a garnish, people kind of thinking about to make with it, if it might be good in a salad, some other things. Um, Great. I love this kind of thinking about collards and hidden carrots. Yep, I like that. They are because they're purple, so they do kind of blend in. For me, I think it's interesting now that you've mentioned the carrots. When I looked at it, I thought everything was mostly green, but I think next to the carrots, it's almost like that broccoli. You can kind of it kind of brings out that kind of purpley tone sometimes that broccoli has different varieties. So yeah, just looking at the colors, I really loved reading about people noticing the relationship between some of the different colors, the beautiful red radishes with the red flowers and the citrus. Great. Awesome. So if no one likes to share, we might just move on from this activity. We'll give folks another minute if anyone wants to share about how it was to engage with this activity. Yeah, so this was just a quick activity that we wanted to share to kind of get our minds thinking about the ways in which you think about curiosity. I think we're going to talk a lot about the ways that the tenets of kind of building curious learners. And one of those are really prompting questions and creating questioning. I really love the kind of variety and variations in the responses people had, from really talking about the kind of more emotions that it brought up or the colors or the things that they were thinking about cooking. I think it's always good when you're wanting to, this is a great activity. One, you could do it in person. A kind of visual activity is always a great way to introduce new content. But also, I would say if you're wanting to introduce, new produce or different things, it's really great to just kind of start with something really simple like this, where you're just giving some open-ended questions and students the opportunity to just explore wherever their mind goes. So yeah, thank you everyone for participating. I'm going to pass it to Russell to kick off our presentation about kind of our thinking on curious learning, on how to prompt that.
Thanks so much, Raquel. So over the next 15 or so minutes, just as a little bit of a preview, we're going to be talking some about the ways that we think about curiosity and approaches to teaching and some example strategies. And so this will be a fair amount of presentation. If you have questions, please put them in the chat, and Raquel and I will try to answer them. And we'll also have time at the end of the workshop as well for questions. So also, just as a mechanic note around our presentation, we're going to be sharing this slide deck out following the workshop. So this will be available for everyone for viewing as well. So, to kick us off about looking at what does it mean to activate curiosity. So one of the quotes that really resonate for us is one from Thinking Museum that is, curiosity is the desire to learn, to understand new things, and to know how they work. It is a desire to understand what you do not. And we know that fostering student curiosity can have a direct impact on student engagement, interest, and assist students in driving their learning. And for instance, neuroscientists from the University of California, Davis have found that high curiosity may improve an individual's memory for information they acquire, and they suggest that stimulating curiosity ahead of knowledge acquisition can enhance learning success. So we're really interested in ways that we can be encouraging and cultivating curiosity among our students. And in our kitchen and garden classroom, what this can look like for us is that we encourage students to think critically. We don't simply give them the answers, but we make room for them to discover the answers. And we encourage sensory observations all the time. And we encourage students to ask questions and then take time to ask our students questions as well. So really trying to create this environment of sensory observations and prompting questions and curiosity. And so I'll pass it to Raquel to take us deeper into a few of the tenets of curiosity.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, I think, as we have been talking, as Russell just mentioned, just the ways that we think about it more generally. And I think we'd like to kind of kind of summarize our ideas within kind of these three tenets for developing curious learners. The first tenet is really focused on encouraging students to think critically, right? It's about kind of asking the five whys, right? The hows of a situation, who, what, when, where, why. That's for the five W's, not why, excuse me, of a situation of learning something new, encouraging questions and questioning. So really getting students and leading your lessons with question asking and prompting. And we'll talk about kind of different examples of that. And finally, making space for sensory observations, right? Prioritizing the ways that students are in spaces and using their senses. Great, awesome. So we're going to kind of explore each of those three tenets more deeply. So the first one is really thinking about when we talk about encouraging students to think critically. Today we're going to talk about we're going to talk about things a little bit in some examples, but really talking about it in the instructional strategy perspective. So what are the instructional approaches that support this? And then some examples of the ways that you can look at it or build activities around. So we really love the idea of thinking routines. Thinking routines are teaching strategies that help students think critically about about a topic. They provide frameworks for engagement. So a thinking routine we use a lot that I'm sure a lot of you will use is called a think, pair, share. It's where you give students kind of a broad, really open-ended question, and you give them time to think, digest, write, draw about that question. You then pair students up to discuss that question in kind of a more low stakes sharing because it's just with one other person. And then finally, you give students an opportunity to share as a large group, right? Building that collective knowledge and kind of hearing from their fellow students. Next slide. Another one we use quite a bit at Edible Schoolyard is a sort of see, think, wonder. So it's where you choose or present an image. It could be also kind of a plant, something physical. You invite students to observe what they see. So you ask students to make kind of initial observations of that. Then you invite students in different ways, provoke deeper questions that ask them to look a little bit closer. You ask them to list out their observations and then start to make some inferences about what they see, start to make some connections between those observations and kind of asking the why behind it. And then finally, you kind of ask students their questions, right? So you've given them an opportunity to explore some of the questions that you've prompted for them. And then you give them an opportunity to ask their questions wherever their minds are following or going with the topic. Great. And then finally, it's activity called the three whys, which is really getting students to think about the topic in relation to themselves. What might this topic mean for me, for them? Why might it matter to the people around me in the world, around me, right? My more immediate world, your family, friends, maybe your city, maybe it's your school, your class. And then finally, why might it matter to the world? What does this mean in relation to sort of beyond what my daily, who I interact with possibly daily? What does it mean for the broader world? Great. Wanted to share some examples and uses of the ideas of thinking routines. Again, thinking routines are really helpful when you want students to be processing new information. If you're introducing new concepts and ideas, it's really great to use it to kind of emphasize that. It's really helpful for reflection. So at the end of kind of class, possibly use a thinking routine and kind of summarize some of the learning. And it's useful if you're posing questions to students. A couple of different examples we have is in our lesson, flower discovery, in which students are looking at the anatomy of a flower. We use the see wander a lot, and it's kind of the main activities, just go around and kind of observe flowers before we dig into the anatomy of it. Another example is we created a kind of version of the three whys called circles of connection. It's part of an ongoing kind of worksheet that students use in our curriculum, Understanding Organic. It's really about making meaning from organic and the practices and principles of organic. And it asks students to consider, what does this topic or this question, and we pose a number of questions, mean for them, for their community, and then beyond their community. Next slide. Um, Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the idea of encouraging questions and questioning. Um, Really thinking about kind of the helpful strategies of encouraging the why, kind of saying, why do you think this happens? Or why does this matter? I think asking open-ended questions. So those are questions that have multiple answers. And in some cases, maybe unanswerable. It means about creating dialogue with your students. So being in exchange with your students about what they're learning. Um, so I think, again, if you're crafting an open-ended question, the question could be answered with a yes or no. It's not considered open. So it's just good to really craft the questions that you answer. A lot of the times when I'm designing lessons or designing activities or the ways I'm asking questions, I'll think of what I'm trying to get at, and I'll write out the question, and then I'll write out many, many versions of the way I could ask that question. And for me, it's a way to kind of drill down and find the essence of what is the right way to ask that question that's really going to solicit the kind of response I think is going to be really powerful for students. Some other really great ways to ask open-ended questions or to prompt questioning is to give students some kind of question starters, right? Things like what would happen if, or what would it be like to, or why did ... right? Or how do you know that, or how do you know if? So sometimes, especially if you're wanting to encourage students to really think critically, it can be hard for students to sort of know where to go with a question. So I think question frames or question structures in that way, where you're starting students off, can be really, really helpful to generate thoughts and discussions. Great, next slide. Awesome. Again, some examples of ways that we at Edible Schoolyard uses open-ended questions is we have a resource on our resource page called Crafting a Check-in Question. It's just ways in which we've thought about different types of check-in questions. We have something called a kitchen reflection wheel, which is part of a curriculum I wrote called Cooking with Curiosity, and really, really love this. It's kind of a direction, a wheel that they spin, and then wherever they land, you kind of answer that question. And the questions are meant to provoke kind of deeper considerations around what they're cooking in the classroom. It's really great. And then finally, we have an example of a lesson that's from our Understanding Organic curriculum that's really all about what is organic, and kind of getting students to just make meaning on, when you hear the word organic, what comes to mind for them. And I think in a lot of ways that curriculum is actually, was written really to prompt a deeper investigation of that one question in many different facets. So it's a good example of the ways that you not only could use questions in how you, in soliciting responses from students, but in the ways that you can design. And again, as always, I think it's important to, questions are always helpful to your instruction. I kind of challenge you to think about creating a lesson where kind of 80% of your direct instruction is actually just responding to students answering your questions or you posing questions. So I think it's good to think about that. Look at how you're doing your direct instruction and think about the ways that you can frame the content you're teaching more in a question-based model. Great. Next slide. I'm going to pass it to Russell, who's going to talk a little bit about sensory learning.
Thanks so much, Raquel. So here we are at another core aspect of how we feel and think about encouraging curiosity, and that is, of course, sensory observations. And we learn through our senses, as we all know, and they provide us with different ways to learn and gain knowledge. Sensory learning encourages students to consider other ways to understand what they are learning. And some helpful strategies are to encourage students to use descriptive words with the goal of helping students to create more awareness around sensory experiences. And one quick suggestion is that if you Google sensory language or sensory vocabulary, lots of banks of words come up that can be helpful to encourage students to dive deep into what they smell, touch, taste, hear, feel, what they see. So bringing these sensory experiences more alive and more aware for students to help reinforce the learning and help deepen the learning. And to offer a few examples of sensory-centered lessons that we have available for everyone on our resource library, um, food memories, exploring a community garden, reflecting on food, and sound mapping. And so all of these really encourage and prompt students to dive deep and into what they're experiencing and to reflect on what it is that it means to take a mindful bite out of a piece of fruit, for example, on the reflecting on food, or to recall for themselves a potent food memory and to take themselves back to that moment and what was the setting, who what was the food, was there someone who prepared the food, who was that, and what sort of like feelings and sensations did that experience elicit. And so these are examples of lessons that we offer to to provide some resources to encourage and provide those outlets that really focus on a sensory centered experience for our students and learners. And so now that we have provided a bit of a foundation and a bit of initial resources and offerings as far as ways that we can be deepening curiosity among our students, we would love to open it up to our community here on this call that to start to create a knowledge bank together of different strategies and resources that we can be offering to one another and support each other in this goal of deepening student engagement through deepening curiosity. And so, as you see on our slide deck, and if you were with us before, you may have seen this, but we're going to share out a link to a Padlet in a moment. So what I'll actually do is stop sharing my screen for the moment and then reshare in just another less than a minute, just a few seconds. And I'll provide a bit of a demo of how to use Padlet. And so just 1 minute, I'll pull that up here. And so here we are on the Padlet. The link has been shared in the chat. Feel free to go ahead and click in the link whenever you're ready. And so we've set up this Padlet, which is engaging curious learners, the knowledge sharing bank rather. And so our prompt is to please share lessons, activities, and strategies that build critical thinking, develops questions, and promotes sensory observation. And so we've set up these three broad columns which align with those three tenets of deepening curiosity, which are building critical thinking, ask questions and or develops questioning, and promoting sensory observations. We've pre-populated these columns with all of those resources that Raquel and I just presented on in terms of those instructional strategies, as well as the lesson links that we referenced. And so this Padlet, along with our presentation and all the other resources, will be an ongoing resource that's available for everyone. And now, as I was saying at the top, we have the opportunity to collectively build out a library, a knowledge bank of helpful resources and strategies and activities and lessons towards these goals. And simply in terms of how to use Padlet, what you can do is move your mouse to one of these plus signs. And so if you want to add a entry into the building critical thinking column, you can click that plus sign and then this text bubble will come up. And this is already in there, but I'll share this as an example. You could say, think, pair, share, and maybe write a little bit more of a description or an example of how this has been used for you in your setting and how it worked out. So I won't actually publish it. So that's how to use Padlet. The Padlet is in the chat. Please let me know if you would like any support. And we'll take about 10 minutes to build out our Padlet here. So Once again, let us know if you have any questions, and thank you so much in advance for your collaboration and contributions here. And let's make a wonderful knowledge bank together. All right. So that's just about 10 minutes. And so, as I said a little bit earlier, this is a uh, ongoing resource that is available. It can be a living document that folks can continue to comment and add suggestions to. Um, and so if you have any last contributions you want to make, feel free to quickly add those. And in the meantime, I just want to, one, express my gratitude to everybody and the community here for your generosity in creating and sharing some of these practices and approaches that have worked well for you. And this is creating a lot of inspiration, I think, from myself personally. And I hope it is for you too. So just wanted to take a little bit of time. We have about 3, 4 minutes. If everyone wants to come off a mute and share where you're at or what was a suggestion or two that really resonate with you, or what you're noticing about this process. Just wanted to have a little bit of an opportunity for a whole group share out and reflection. So feel free to take yourself off a mute or post something in the chat, just reflecting on this activity of the knowledge bank creation. Would anyone like, oh, here we go. A few of these, I see that Joan writes, a few of these reminded me of approaches that I've tried and now I have expanded knowledge. Thanks so much for sharing, Joan. Well, as I said, this is a living, ongoing resource. So many great ideas. I see chatting out Heather, trying to take them in all. No need, yeah, don't feel rushed. This is available for ongoing, and we'll share that out. I mean, this you can keep the link, but we'll post it to our website as well. And with that, I'd love to pass it back to Raquel to take us into our next exploration.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Russell. If you could share the slides again. So we're going to spend the next 20 minutes, kind of the rest of the bulk of this workshop in a sort of breakout mini design challenge. I know it's Friday, and so we're going to try this, and it's going to be an opportunity for folks to connect, to think together. We are going to give you 20 minutes, so take your time through it. Before I launch into talking about what the structure for the breakout is going to be, I just wanted to remind folks that, we really want folks to be participating in this, kind of sharing ideas. Totally understandable if you're not in a place to be able to do that. We just ask again that you just rename yourself No Breakout Room, and then we are happy to we'll put you, basically all the people who've identified no breakout room, we're going to put you in a breakout room together. You don't need to talk to you all to each other there. We just do that so that we can keep the main room open, and that if Russell and I need to talk about some different things, we have that as an opportunity. Again, so if you are not able to participate for whatever reason, just rename yourself No Breakout, and we'll move you to the room where you don't need to share. So this mini design challenge, the prompt for this design challenge for you all to work together is to think about how you might design an interactive activity in the kitchen or garden or both, focused on strawberries, 'tis the season, around that utilizes the tenets of critical thinking, that encourages questions, and that promotes sensory observation. So kind of saying, how would you do this? So essentially the directions is in your breakout group. We want you to kind of use the following steps to design an activity that fits that prompt. Again, it's good to decide for one person to take notes. At the end of this activity, we'll hopefully we'll be asking you all to share out your thoughts and what you designed. So maybe in your breakout group, just choose somebody who is willing to kind of share out what the group discussed and designed. And then again, the steps are sort of first decide on who your audience is. What age range is your activity for? Next, it's good to decide on what's the primary activity. What will students be doing? Will it be a garden activity? Is it a kitchen activity, a garden and kitchen activity? Next, I want you to think about choosing one of the three thinking routines. So how might you integrate maybe a think, pair, share, or an I wonder? If there's a different type of thinking routine, and you can look on the Padlet, some folks recommended some other ones. One of the ones was like a KWL. What do you know about the topic? What do you want to learn about the topic? So you can use that if you have a different thinking routine that you like, share that with the group. Next, we want you to kind of generate a set of questions that you think about the topic prompt students' curiosity. So thinking about how you might design a lesson around the talking points that really being focused on the kind of responding to those questions. And overall, think about how you're engaging some sort of sensory learning. Maybe it's completely a sensory activity that's doing some different types of critical thinking or engaging a thinking routine. But consider the ways that you're making your activity or a lesson into a sensory observation. So we'll be giving you about 20 minutes. So we'll come back at about 4:15 from the groups and take some time to share out. Hi, welcome back. Hopefully that was an interesting activity. Generated some interesting processes around designing. I'm curious to hear from folks in the groups, some of the things that they came up with. Who would like to share? Well, I encourage you to please add, if folks who did share, add what you kind of came up with, if you don't mind, in the Padlet. I'd love to capture kind of the discussion and what the other groups sort of thought about there, since it is a resource that will kind of have ongoing and that we'll share out to everybody. So thank you again for participating and for thinking through that. Also encourage you to just take different opportunities to sort of think about using maybe some of those prompts or using that prompt to design when you're actually in more of a process in which you're designing for your classes. So maybe some of those kind of questions, a way of thinking, might help provoke some things in your own design process. Great, and I'm going to pass it to Russell to take us kind of towards a closing.
Sounds good. Thank you, Raquel. And echoing what you just said, Raquel, thanks you to everybody for participating. And yeah, and gonna share screen again, and we are coming to the close of our presentation, and so we wanted to offer a few last tips and suggestions as we are wrapping up our conversation around deepening curiosity. And just one of our parting suggestions and tips is to encourage questions and dialogue in how you design lessons, etc. Encourage questions. Curiosity is prompted with questions, but not all questions are created equally. And think about the way that you ask questions. Notice if questions are prompting students to ask more questions. Does the question seem exciting and fun to you to answer? And if they aren't engaged to you, likely is they won't be engaging for your students. And so that's why we're so excited and passionate about those open-ended questions and that creative process of crafting questions that really prompt and encourage curiosity. And I'll pass it to Raquel.
Awesome. The next point is really to remember to make room for the unstructured. You know, I think I love in those examples that folks brought back from their groups, there was an element of the unstructured in those. And so I appreciate that. But also to remember that like unstructured time doesn't mean that you're not facilitating a process for students. I encourage you to give students free unstructured time with some prompts, with some scaffolding of the experience, still unstructured, but it gives a little bit more of a meaning. Maybe it's one sensory prompt for students. They're going out into the garden to investigate, having them collect one sensory observation. I also think unstructured time is a really valuable and surprising time to have more one-on-one direct conversations with students. I encourage you to think about that time as an opportunity to have exchange with students. So for example, if you see a student eating a tomato, maybe prompt them a little bit with some questions and engage with them and talk with them, both about what they're experiencing, and also just about them and where they are in that day. So unstructured is that opportunity to have more direct possible one-on-one with students. um, and yeah, and I'm going to pass it back to Russell.
Thanks, Raquel. Be enthusiastic and curious yourself. Us as educators, we're role models for our students, and the more that we feel excited and curious and passionate, the more your students will feel that. So we highly and very much encourage everyone to stay curious ourselves. If you're designing an activity, explore the space for yourself first and include your observations in how you might prompt students around the activities. And so taking ourselves into the experience and allowing ourselves to, in a small way, see what the space, the different crops or the different elements and the different settings, the garden, the kitchen, what do those spaces and those elements and materials evoke for us, and what questions and passion, what questions, what passions, what curiosities do we find ourselves um, thinking about as we come into the spaces, and so bring that into our teaching as we engage and serve young people.
Yeah. And then finally, always remember to take time to consider and to reflect on what you're teaching and engaging with. If you've seen Russell and I lead workshops, we love reflection. We think it's a really powerful tool to make opportunities to ask reflection questions of our students. And also it's a really powerful tool for us as educators to learn. So I, recommend considering making the space for it, to always reflect and notice kind of how you are in your practice.
And so with that, thank you everybody.